Hello, and welcome to another episode of Undiscovered Beasts and Strange Phenomena. Please join our experienced and knowledgeable panel of hosts as we explore the great mysteries of our time: Bigfoot, UFOs, ghosts, and unexplained phenomena.
Greetings. Welcome to From Beyond, Not of This Earth. I'm your host, William Pullin. Tonight we're going to discuss a case that has been kind of fallen to the wayside, one of the most famous lesser-known cases in UFO history. Before we touch on the case, I want to discuss one of the organizations in a very cursory way that investigated this famous case. I'm talking about the COMETA report. The COMETA report, which translates as the Committee for In-Depth Studies, was comprised of former high-ranking military officers, government officials, and former members of the official UFO study that was conducted in France. It was not intended for public consumption. The conclusions of the COMETA report were only for the highest level of French government. So that's just a short, very incomplete summary of what the COMETA report was all about. I will touch upon that organization in a later episode. But this famous case, the Lakenheath-Bentwaters radar visual case of 1956, some individuals call it the Bentwaters-Lakenheath case, depends on your point of view, is, in my humble opinion, one of the strongest cases in the UFO books. It's one of the few cases where I will definitively attach the word extraterrestrial as an explanation. I am very cautious when I attach that term to any case. But when it comes to this one, I'm comfortable putting that into a proper perspective. We have quite a few radar visual cases on the books, but Bentwaters-Lakenheath was top secret. It was unknown to the public until the Condon Committee examined it in the late 60s. And we'll get into that a little later as time goes on. So this case was reported to Project Blue Book. They claim the explanation was false radar returns and the sighting of Mars. We'll discuss that at length also a little later on. But let's begin. So the case began. It's in the Project Blue Book files at 2130Z or at 9:30 p.m. on August 13th, 1956. A technical sergeant by the name of Elmer L. Wenry, I'm probably butchering his name, was a radar operator at RAF Station Bentwaters, England. He spotted 12 to 15 blips on his radar scope. The squadron he was assigned to was the U.S. Air Force's 1264th Airborne Air Control Squadron. According to the Blue Book file, quote, this group was picked up approximately 8 miles southwest of RAF Station Bentwaters and were tracked on the radar scope clearly until the objects were approximately 14 miles northeast of Bentwaters. At the latter point of the course of these objects, they faded considerably from the radar scope, unquote. Also for the Blue Book files, quote, at the approximate 40 miles range, individual objects appeared to converge into one very large object, which appeared several times larger than a B-36 aircraft due to the size of the blip on the radar scope. At the time that the individual objects seemed to converge into one large object, the large object appeared to remain stationary for 10 to 15 full minutes. The large object then moved northeast, approximately 5 to 6 miles, then stopped movement for 3 to 5 minutes, moving north, disappearing off the radar scope. At around the same approximate time, an airman second class by the name of John Bacare Jr., another radar operator at the base, spotted a single blip 25 to 40 miles to the southeast. As he watched, the target seemed to be moving on a sharp heading at a very high rate of speed. Within about a half a minute, when the blip was 15 to 20 miles from the radar installation, it disappeared. That scenario will transpire several times in this case, where a blip will be picked up on radar, a sharp blip, a definitive blip, and when it closes in to a certain distance from the base, it disappears. Other radar visual cases on the books of the UFO phenomenon do describe that same kind of scenario, but it's very prevalent with this case. According to the figures developed at the site by the radar operators, the object was moving conservatively at 5,000 miles per hour. Remember, we're talking August of 1956, not 2020. About a half an hour later, at approximately 10 p.m. local time, and about 5 minutes after Wenry's first sighting ended, he saw another blip on the radar, again located about 30 miles east of the base. This blip was only on radar about 16 seconds, but it moved to a point which was west of the station and then faded. So the distance it covered in that 16 seconds suggested it was moving at 12,000 miles per hour within the atmosphere. That's quite a bit of speed. To say that's not a very scientific statement, but 12,000 miles an hour within the Earth's atmosphere clearly, strongly suggests something anomalous, something unknown. But that's my personal point of view. Further on, from the Bentwaters control tower, several other individuals, one of which was Staff Sergeant Lawrence S. Wright, reported a bright light. Now, we've entered into the realm of not only radar contact, but visual contact from control tower operators and military personnel on the ground. That adds a lot of strength to this case. The names and dates and quotes I'm adding to this broadcast are from the Project Blue Book files. I have almost a complete set of the files, so I took the time to write these quotes down because they put this case into perspective. I don't want to simply state dates and times. I want to use the words from the witnesses. I think that carries a lot of weight. Wright described the objects as about the size of a pinhead at arm's length, quite small, and it rose slowly from a point just over the horizon. It remained inside for about a full hour, appearing and disappearing, appearing and disappearing. That object that Lawrence S. Wright cited was allegedly the planet Mars. That was an effort by Blue Book to debunk the case. Now, that individual sighting might actually have been the planet Mars. I've been unable to determine if that debunking explanation held any water or not. It certainly went along the lines that Blue Book was operating at the time. They were trying to lessen the importance of cases. But this sighting that Wright reported was lumped in with the whole scenario we're talking about. So it may have been anomalous, it may not have been. But we'll leave it at that. As Henry was tracking the object on radar, a flight of two jets entered the scene, a pair of T-33s. They were returning from a routine mission. They had nothing to do with these sightings. The two pilots, which were identified in the Project Blue Book files, but only by last name, Metz and Rowe. Eventually, I was able to dig up from the commander reports their full names, which was First Lieutenant Charles V. Metz and First Lieutenant Andrew C. Rowe. That could be a little difficult, but the commander report, and I had to discuss this with some other friends of mine that live in the Northeast, the commander report has never been published in English. It was released to the public in France, but not translated. So that's kind of an issue. But the names were there in the reports. As they approached Bentwaters, they were set off to try to find these objects. They searched the area for about 45 full minutes, vectored by radar operators at the base. They failed to find anything. They gave up around 10:15 local time. A full 40 minutes later, just before 11 p.m. local time, another object was spotted, again about 30 miles from the base, east, heading west, at only about 2,000 to 4,000 miles an hour, which is slightly slower, and I'm trying to be facetious here, or sarcastic, as the case may be, slightly slower than the 12,000 mile per hour speed that was attributed to another object earlier. So this object passed directly overhead of the base, disappeared from the radar scope about 30 miles away. All this visual activity, all this radar anomalies that are being picked up is a strong correlation to the Washington Nationals case from July 1952. Ground observers, radar tower operator observers, and instrumentality. So, again, a highly strong case, multiple chains of evidence. That object that disappeared from the radar scope was also sighted from an airborne point of view. A C-47 pilot saw the object flash beneath his plane. So another layer now we have radar tower operators, instrumentality, ground observers, and air observers, the pilot of the C-47, multiple layers. This light was not only seen by the pilot. Several people on the ground also saw the same bright blur in the sky. Again, multiple layers, multiple chains of evidence. The issue with those observations were there weren't any definitive details that the observers could add to the testimony. So very general statements like, I saw the object, it's a kind of a correlation with what was also being seen, but no definitive details. So nothing that was really added to the case, per se. UFO debunker Philip Klass, the dreaded Philip Klass, he speculated that the pilot of the C-47 saw a meteor in a very general way. He didn't supply any specific details to support that case, that point of view for this case. The atmospheric physicist, Dr. James E. McDonald, disagreed wholeheartedly with Klass, which didn't surprise me. Dr. McDonald was an objective individual that used the scientific method. Klass was a debunker, which means he didn't even look at the data. He just tried to debunk the case and threw explanations out there that weren't supported by the data at all. So, not surprising. McDonald, using ground observations and the pilot's sighting, suggested the object was between ground level and approximately 3,000 to 4,000 feet. Klass, on the other hand, failed to mention there were any ground observations of the object. None whatsoever. He based his conclusion on what the C-47 pilot saw. He did not mention any ground observations, which throws his explanation in a dark light. The sighting by the C-47 pilot and those on the ground was the last of the events of the Bentwaters base. At some point, the action shifted west to the Lakenheath Air Force Base, where radars began to detect anomalous objects. Ground personnel made sightings at Lakenheath Air Base. Some of the observations there were of a luminous object approaching from the southeast that would stop and then shoot off to the east. Again, anomalous maneuvers made at high rates of speed. Maneuvers and speeds which were not attainable by aircraft of the time period. Very interesting. The Blue Book files noted, quote, thus two radar sets, that is, Lakenheath GCA and the Radar Air Traffic Control Center, RATCC radars, and three ground observers report substantially the same thing. The fact that the radar and ground visual observations were made on its rapid acceleration lend credence to the report, unquote. Those words are very heavy. They carry a lot of weight. That's a quote from Project Blue Book. Blue Book at the time, this is after Ed Ruppelt had retired, after he had left the group. So the last legitimate time that Blue Book was actually an investigative unit had passed. Now they were basically a PR firm. The best cases did not come to Blue Book. So for the Blue Book files to contain a quote like that is quite interesting. So back to Lakenheath. At about midnight, one of the operators called the chief flight controller at, the name is escaping me, excuse me, Meatus Head, Norfolk, England. I'll try not to butcher the name, I apologize. He was reporting a strange object buzzing the base. In other words, flying around the base, maneuvering around the base at a low altitude. An FHC Wimbledon would later say, quote, I scrambled a Venom night fighter from the battle flight through sector, and my controller in the interception control team would consist of one fighter controller, a corporal, a tracker, and a height reader. That is, 4 highly trained personnel, in addition to myself, could now see the object on our radarscopes, unquote. Another layer. Highly trained individuals. All testimony is important, whether it's from John Smith in Kentucky, whether it's from Albert Einstein, or whether it's from Alan Hynek. Whatever the point of view, it's all important. It's all adds to the data. But when you have trained observers, law enforcement officials, radar operators, military pilots, that makes that testimony a little more weighty, a little more important. Does it make it infallible? Absolutely not. But when you have highly trained individuals discussing something they're seeing in the sky that they can identify, that holds a lot of weight, a lot of weight. Eventually, the interceptor, it was a Venom night fighter that was dispatched, was directed to that object. The pilot said he had a bright light inside and would investigate. At about 13 miles west of the Lakenheath Air Force Base, he reported a loss of target and a white light. Eventually, he was directed to another target over Bedford, and that navigator locked it on to it with his radar. He said, quote, "It was the clearest target I've ever seen on radar," unquote. Again, strong words from a trained observer. Not long after that, the radar contact was broken, and the Lakenheath controllers, the radar operators, noted, and they reported that the object had passed the Venom fighter and was now behind it. In other words, at a 6 o'clock position. The pilot did acknowledge the message and tried various maneuvers to reverse the situation. In other words, try to get this object off his tail. He was unable to do so. The flight capabilities of the Venom fighter, he was unable to maneuver in a way to get the UFO in front of him. He's kind of stuck. So at some point, the pilot had to return to his base because he was low on fuel, and that was that. A second fighter was sent to the area. He was unable to make contact. That second pilot returned to the base. At that point, no other fighters were scrambled. And by 3:30 a.m., all the targets had vanished from the radar scopes. So that kind of brings to a close the activity at the Bentwaters Lakenheath radar visual case. Now, after that, after the incident occurred, this whole event was not known to the public. It was not until late in the Condon Committee's investigations, we can call it that, where they gained access to this this event and conducted some investigations. And we'll discuss that in links here. There's some interesting perspectives from these quotes that I'm going to discuss that lead one to believe that certain investigations were not really unbiased, and certain investigators were certainly looking at this with a thoroughly scientific eye, one of which was Dr. James E. McDonald, who wrote in his paper entitled Science and Default. That was published in the book UFOs, a Scientific Debate. Quote, "The file does, however, include a lengthy dispatch that proposes a series of what I must term wholly irrelevant hypotheses about Perseid meteors with ionized gases in their wake, which may be traced on radar scopes, and inversions that may cause interference between two radar stations some distance apart," unquote. So basically, the Blue Book files were trying to fill this event and explain it with irrelevant data. That's an effort to add window dressing to the case, take our eye off the case, take our eye off the anomalous behaviors that are being reported. That's not surprising. The investigators for Condon Committee noted, however, quote, "One of the interesting aspects of this case is the remarkable accuracy of the account of the witnesses as given in the letter, which was apparently written from memory 12 years after the incident. This is referring to a letter that was written to the Condon Committee by a witness of these events." Continuing, quote, "There are a number of minor discrepancies, mostly a matter of figures. The C-47 at 5,000 feet was actually evidently at 4,000 feet. And he seems to have confused the identity of location C with B, as noted in his letter. However, all of the major details of this account seem well confirmed by the Blue Book account," unquote. So the letter they received from the witness, the Condon Committee received this letter. The details in the letter, while having some discrepancies, were minor discrepancies. Therefore, this witness writing a letter over a decade after the events was relatively accurate. That speaks volumes. Another quote, "After the Condon Committee, which was financed by the U.S. Air Force, reviewed the case, quote, in conclusion, although conventional or natural explanations certainly cannot be ruled out, the probability of such seems low in this case, and the probability that at least one genuine UFO is involved seems high. Quote, outstanding, fascinating." That quote is inside the Condon Committee's report. I state it again. Quote, "In conclusion, although conventional or natural explanations certainly cannot be ruled out, the probability of such seems low in this case, and the probability that at least one genuine UFO is involved seems high." unquote. That's an incredibly important quote. One more quote from the esteemed Dr. J. Allen Hynek. This quote's found in the Project Blue Book files under a quote-unquote memorandum for record. Quote, the Lakenheath case could constitute a source of embarrassment to the Air Force, and should the facts, as so far reported, get into the public realm, it is not necessarily to point out that what excellent use the several dozen UFO societies and other publicity artists would make of such an incident. It is, therefore, of great importance that further information on the technical aspects of the original observations be obtained without loss of time for the original observers, unquote. The UFO societies that Dr. Hynek was referring to was NICAP and APRO. NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomenon, and APRO, I'm drawing a blank here, but APRO was the organization run by Jim and Coral Lorenzen, the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization, excuse me. After the Condon Committee investigated this case, there's no evidence from that anyone in the military did any kind of follow-up investigation. Even the Condon Committee scientists, the investigators, who were more objective than how they were portrayed. Because if anyone out there has read the Condon Committee report, the report leaves open the possibility of extraterrestrial. The investigations were not all biased. There were some well-done investigations conducted within that report. Unfortunately, the summary, which was written by the director of the Condon Committee, Edward U. Condon, is clearly anti-UFO. And that summary does not accurately portray what is contained in the report. I want to leave one final report tonight, one final quote. This quote is contained in the COMETA report, the French COMETA report. It's from Gordon Thayer. Gordon Thayer was a radar expert for the Condon Committee. At some point in the late 60s, early 70s, after the Condon Committee's report was released, he wrote an article in the journal Aeronautics and Astronautics. Astronautics and Aeronautics. I apologize. And this quote, I love this quote. It's strong, it's definitive, it's objective. Mr. Thayer says, quote, if one considers the strong credibility of the information and the coherence and continuity of reports, as well as their high degree of strangeness, this UFO case is certainly one of the more troubling cases known to date, unquote. Outstanding. I want to thank everyone for listening tonight to From Beyond, Not of This Earth. I appreciate all your patience. I'm getting more and more comfortable with these broadcasts. I'm really appreciating the opportunity to broadcast to everyone out there some objective and accurate information, discussing some lesser-known UFO cases and whatnot. You can find me at William Pullin UFO Historian on Facebook. That's my Facebook page. And also at U4Real, a historical review. So until next time, for From Beyond, Not of This Earth, this is William Pullin signing off. Until next time, take care.